Okay, welcome back everyone. Welcome back from your break. I'm going to share this next topic with you, which is enlightenment. What is enlightenment? Because as I was mentioning, if you're going to take a journey somewhere, you'd like to know what's there. What is that thing? It's because then you'll be able to more easily navigate your way to that. And then once you arrive, you'll be able to know that you've actually arrived. So enlightenment is that way, that you like to know a bit about it before you actually make your journey to it, because then you'll be able to more readily make your way to it. And once you arrive and your mind is enlightened, you'll know. So as I share the teachings with you to help you guys understand what enlightenment is, it's important to understand that by the end of our conversation, you're going to know more about enlightenment than you do right now, but you're not going to know everything there is to know about enlightenment at the end of our conversation here, because it's kind of like chocolate ice cream. I can sit here and describe chocolate ice cream to you all day long, but until you actually taste it, you're not going to really know what it tastes like. So it's the same thing with enlightenment. I can describe it to you all day long, but you're not going to fully understand it until your mind's getting closer and closer to it. But as I describe it to you, you'll know more about it by the time we're done than you do right now, and then you'll be able to more easily navigate your way to it. So as we go, feel free to ask questions. You guys know here at the temple, you can use the microphones, and those of you guys online, you can ask questions by putting it into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or raising your hand in Zoom and asking any questions that you like. So first, as I was just sharing, it's helpful to understand that it's a challenge for the unenlightened mind to understand what enlightenment is, because we can't even fathom a time or an opportunity for you to get to a point where you never experience anger, or you never experience frustration, or any of these other feelings that is going to be eliminated by the time you get to enlightenment. So it's a real challenge for the mind to understand what enlightenment is, but you'll definitely understand more about it by the time we get to the end of our conversation. This is the ultimate goal of the teachings of the Buddha. As you're learning and practicing and developing, getting the mind to the enlightened mental state is the ultimate goal. And that's where his teachings lead to. And you do that through learning, through reflecting, independently verify, and practice. So what enlightenment is it's a mental state that you attain in this life where the mind is peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy. You can attain it in this life, or you can attain it at death. By the time you get to enlightenment, you will have eliminated 100% of all discontent feelings. The mind will no longer experience any discontentedness. Anger, sadness, frustration, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, stress, anxiety, loneliness, boredom, shyness, resentment, jealousy, even the slightest displeasure is eliminated from the enlightened mind. The mind will be concentrated, steady, and unshakable. There's nothing that'll shake up the mind. Like right now, if you got a phone call that your mom was being rushed to the hospital, she's been in a terrible car accident, your mind might be shaken up by that. And that's just because of what's going on in the mind that you're going to learn about in this course, that you can actually eliminate this. It's not your love that's causing your mind to be shaken up. It's something else, and you're going to learn about that in this course. So by the time you get to enlightenment, not only is your mind peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy permanently, but you'll notice that the Buddha teaches about the cycle of rebirth, that what you're doing as you're getting to the enlightened mental state is you're escaping the cycle of rebirth so that you're not continuing to come back into the world over and over and over again. What you're going to hear me talk about tomorrow is that the teachings of the Buddha are independently verifiable. There's no belief in his teachings whatsoever, including the cycle of rebirth. Right now, you might not know how to independently verify the cycle of rebirth, but as you journey on your path to enlightenment, there's teachings to be able to help you independently verify that the cycle of rebirth is true. But even at this early stage, you might have been experiencing something that you don't realize is actually residual memories from previous lives. If you know what deja vu is, or you've ever experienced deja vu, where you're experiencing something and you know that this is so utterly familiar, but it wasn't experienced in this life, this is your residual memories from your past lives surfacing to the mind. But oftentimes when that experience happens, we usually just kick it to the side. We're like, whatever, right? But honestly, what this is this is the mind experiencing residual memories from your past life, that this thing, it just feels so utterly familiar. Like, I've been here before. I've done this before. I've had this conversation before. This is the residual memories that are coming from your past lives. But there's ways to independently verify the cycle of rebirth that is even deeper and more profound than that. But I just share that with you to be able to help you see that this cycle of rebirth is actually true. And you can actually see it more and more for yourself. But usually what I teach students is to set this aside when they're first starting on their journey to enlightenment, because what's happened in the past, it's in the past. It doesn't matter right now. And what may or may not happen in the future, it's in the future. It hasn't happened yet. So right now, your mind's discontent, and you need to be able to solve that. So focusing on the core central teachings is what's going to help you to be able to do that. But ultimately, you'll be able to learn about the cycle of rebirth and being able to independently verify it and see the truth for yourself. But you're going to see this kind of underlying theme in the teachings of the Buddha, where he's helping you to be able to see this elimination of the cycle of rebirth, because that's one of the things you're accomplishing. Because no matter how great your life has been, I'm sure you've experienced some misery and despair in this life. And if you could make a choice of whether to do this all over again or not, you'd probably make the choice of, yeah, I'm not interested in doing this again. Well, you can make the choice, right? It is your choice that by us choosing to get to enlightenment, you'll be able to see your mind's accomplishing that, because your mind's becoming more and more peaceful. And you'll know that you're not ever going to experience rebirth ever again, because you've escaped the cycle of rebirth when your mind's gotten to the enlightened mental state. So just know that that's part of what the Buddha is teaching as part of his teachings. And he taught this for various reasons, which I talk about in other classes and courses, and we can discuss it if you like, why he actually taught the cycle of rebirth. By the time you get to enlightenment, your mind will be calm and relaxed, but yet attentive and alert. Sometimes when we think calm and relaxed, we think like vegetated state, but that's not what the enlightened mind is experiencing. It's calm and relaxed, but it's attentive and alert. It has ambition, it has motivation, it has enthusiasm. And the way that this mental state is accomplished is by eliminating what's called craving, anger, and ignorance. I'm going to be talking about this on Wednesday morning. So Wednesday morning, we'll be talking about the 3 poisons or the 3 unwholesome roots. This is where you're going to learn about what's really plaguing the mind. This is like a high-level description of the pollutions that are in the mind. But the most detailed description is called the 10 fetters. And I'm going to introduce you guys to those here in a moment. So by eliminating craving, anger, and ignorance, in dissolving the ego to realize non-self, that's what's actually going to produce the enlightened mental state. And by the time you get to enlightenment, you'll be practicing generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom, that you'll be basing your decisions in those 3 wholesome roots. The enlightened mental state, it's a mental state that you acquire. But the path to enlightenment is a purification of the mind, where you're purifying the mind of these 3 poisons, or more detailed is the 10 fetters. So you're eliminating the conditions that are keeping the mind in the unenlightened state. The way that you can think about it is like the sun is shining, and then there's these clouds that are in front of the sun. But when you get rid of the clouds, the sun can shine through, and there's more brightness and radiance shining through. So you can think about it as if the mind is already enlightened in its natural state. And what you're doing on the path to enlightenment is you're clearing away the pollution. You're clearing away those clouds so that the enlightened qualities can shine through more and more. So even though we talk about attaining enlightenment, it's like describing it as if you don't have it. One of the ways you can think about it is the mind is already enlightened. The natural state of the mind is already enlightened, but there's these pollutions that are in the way that are hindering you from being able to experience it. So when you clear that out, then the qualities of enlightenment can shine through more and more. And this is more directly experienced as you're starting to get closer and closer to enlightenment. And you can see this truth because as you're getting closer and closer to enlightenment, you can start seeing more and more of the qualities of enlightenment shining through. Even though we call it enlightenment, it's not like a light switch. It's not like 1 minute ago you were unenlightened and now you're enlightened. Instead, your mind is gradually getting closer and closer to this, and you start seeing the qualities of enlightenment starting to shine through more and more. If you think back to your childhood, maybe perhaps you were a bit more angry, a bit more frustrated and agitated, where now, after having aged and maybe learned some things and trained your mind a bit, you're starting to notice more happiness come through. You're maybe starting to notice more peacefulness come through. And that's because you're starting to get more and more of this pollution out of the way. So this kind of description of your mind is already enlightened and you just need to remove these pollutions so that those qualities can shine through. This is more along the lines of what you experience rather than this attainment of enlightenment. Even though we say it that way, sometimes you can understand it as if the mind is already enlightened. And the journey to enlightenment is to eliminate the conditions that are keeping the mind in the unenlightened state. Sometimes you'll hear people describe enlightenment as ultimate happiness or ultimate bliss. I don't describe it that way, even though there's plenty of happiness in the enlightened mental state, but it's unconditioned happiness, where in the unenlightened state, you experience this conditional happiness, where this condition has to be met, and 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 then I will be happy. But by the time you get to enlightenment, all those conditions are eliminated, and the mind is just always happy. But there's something called the jhanas. What the jhanas are these preliminary phases that the mind goes through as you're making your way to the first stage of enlightenment. In these preliminary phases, there's 4 of them, and there are certain qualities that you experience as you're making your way through these phases. In one of the first jhanas, you experience this bliss. It's like, oh my goodness, wow. It's like somebody turned on the light switch or something. Sometimes it can be very sudden as you enter into the jhana, but this isn't enlightenment itself. And sometimes when people get into the jhanas, they think they're actually enlightened, because the difference between being off the path to enlightenment to being in the jhanas is like night and day. Whatever you're experiencing in the jhanas, it pales in comparison to what you experience in the enlightened mental state, but it's very impactful when you start experiencing that first jhana, and people experience ultimate bliss in that first jhana. And oftentimes they think that they're actually enlightened. And this is why people are describing enlightenment as ultimate bliss, because they're experiencing the jhanas, not understanding that they're not enlightened yet, and they think they're enlightened, so they'll describe that as enlightenment. This is where sometimes you'll hear people say that enlightened beings still experience sadness and sorrow and frustration and annoyment and things like this, because they're actually in the jhanas, thinking that they're enlightened. They're still experiencing sorrow and grief and displeasure, and they're describing that enlightened beings still experiencing those things. But I can assure you that your mind has the capability to completely eliminate all of that stuff, that by the time you're enlightened, you won't experience any sorrow, any grief, any displeasure whatsoever. All those discontent feelings will be eliminated. So when I describe enlightenment, I describe it as peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy. And these are mental states that you're experiencing that are permanent. They're unconditioned. There doesn't need to be any condition met in order to experience those qualities, that you've eliminated the causes and conditions that are producing the discontentedness. And that's why your mind is now in this permanent mental state, because it's experiencing the unconditioned qualities or the unconditioned mental state of enlightenment. And this is peace, calm, serenity, and contentedness with joy. And there's other things you're experiencing too. These are some of the advantages of getting to enlightenment. Not only is the mind peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy, but you're also experiencing a high degree of focus, concentration, clarity, and deep memory, because you've eliminated those pollutions. So the mind is performing more optimally. When you've got these pollutions in the mind, it can't perform optimally. So this is why the mind easily gets shaken up when it's polluted, when it's unenlightened. But when you purify the mind, you'll notice this focus, concentration, memory, and clarity of mind, because the mind's now performing optimally. As I mentioned, you'll eliminate all these discontent feelings: the sadness, anger, frustration, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, stress, anxiety, loneliness, boredom, shyness, resentment, jealousy, even the slightest displeasure. You're not even in a bad mood ever. Right? This is because you've eliminated the causes and conditions that are producing it. And you'll gradually see your mind getting closer and closer to that. You'll have deep wisdom because you'll have cultivated wisdom of the natural laws of existence. And you'll notice that you'll be able to be polite, kind, friendly, and respectful to everybody. Right now, you might find that challenging, that there might be certain people that you like and certain people that you dislike. And when there's this person that you dislike, you might find it really hard to be polite, kind, friendly, and respectful. But this is just what's going on in your own mind. When you purify your mind, you won't see people as, I like this person and I dislike this person. The only reason why that's occurring is because of the pollutions of mind. And I'm going to describe those to you as we go forward in the course, that you can eradicate all of this. And you aren't going to agree with what other people do, but you can still love the person. And this is something that you can learn about. By the time you get to enlightenment, you won't be causing any harm to other beings. You'll have eliminated that. And you'll notice that your personal and professional relationships will blossom. Because in the unenlightened state, we tend to be bitter and harsh and hostile, aggressive. We tend to be unskillful in the way that we interact with people. And because of that, it damages our relationships. But by the time you get to enlightenment, you won't be doing those things anymore. So you'll see that your personal and professional relationships will really blossom. They will be at ease by the time you get to enlightenment. Next, let's talk about how to actually attain enlightenment. These are the core central teachings of the Buddha, and you're going to essentially be learning all of these as part of this course. The 3 universal truths, the 4 noble truths, the Eightfold Path, the 5 precepts. These are all things that I'm going to be teaching you in this course. Then the Brahma Viharas. I'm not going to be teaching this to you directly in this course, but I am going to be referencing them tomorrow at a certain point in time. But there are other classes and programs where I do teach the Brahma Viharas. You're going to need to know those and practice those. It's chapter 14 in the first book. So in the group learning program, I do teach the Brahma Viharas because it's an important thing that you need to learn. And in the next course, which is Harmony in Relationships, which I think the next one I'm going to be teaching is in October. In that course, I teach the Brahma Viharas as well. So I do teach those, and I reference it in this course, but it's not actually taught until other programs. The 10 fetters, I'm about to introduce you to those right now. Then the 7 factors of enlightenment, you're going to learn those now as well. And then you're going to start developing this extensive meditation training. This is the core central teachings. You're going to need other things in order to get to enlightenment, but this is usually what you're focusing on when you're first getting started on your journey. Probably the first 6 months, even a year, you might be focusing on these kinds of things when you first get started. But you're never believing any of these things. You're learning them. You're reflecting on them to independently verify them, and you're practicing them. You are on your own independent journey. A teacher is like a tour guide, pointing out to you the things that you need to learn and helping you to learn those things and providing you the resources to be able to learn those things. But it's you that's actually doing the work to learn these things. So these are the core central teachings that you'll need to learn. These are the 10 fetters. These are the 10 pollutions that are in the mind. They're organized in the lower fetters and then the higher fetters. I'm going to introduce you to a few of these because this is the underlying thing that the Buddha is guiding you to eliminate. So tomorrow when I teach you the Eightfold Path, which is the core central teaching of the Buddha, he's going to be teaching you all kinds of things to be able to help you train your mind. But understand at the core of that is the 10 fetters, that the Buddha is helping you to eliminate these. What a fetter is it's like a shackle and a chain with a ball that keeps you trapped in the unenlightened state. During the lifetime of the Buddha, if you were a criminal, they would attach a fetter to your ankle, and this is how they would keep you confined to a certain area. Like a field, they would keep you trapped in that particular area by attaching this fetter to your ankle. So that's why he referred to these as fetters, because these 10 pollutions are keeping your mind trapped in the unenlightened state. And it's when you eradicate these that the mind moves to the enlightened mental state. And slowly but surely, as you're wearing these away, you'll see more peace and joy starting to shine through. So when I talk about that analogy of the sun with the clouds, these are the clouds. This is the pollution that's in your mind. And this is what you'll ultimately need to learn and train your mind to eliminate. But here at the beginning of this course, I'm just going to introduce you to them. And just understand that everything that I teach you is working to eliminate these in one way or another. And then as you get closer to the jhanas, that's where you start looking more closely at these 10 fetters. There's a retreat coming up in about 2 weeks where I'm going to spend an entire class period on each individual fetter. I'm going to explain to you what it is, or the symptoms that it actually is producing in your mind, how to eliminate it, and how to know that you've actually eliminated it. So we're going to spend like an hour and a half on each individual fetter. But here I'm just going to introduce you to a couple of them so that you'll understand what they are. So personal existence view, this is where your mind has the confusion or misunderstanding or misperception that this body is you. And it's clinging to the body and it's clinging to the mind, thinking that this is who you are. And now, if you say spill something on your clothing, you might be embarrassed if you're in a social situation. Or if you see a wrinkle or a mole or a pimple, or your hair is turning gray, or you're losing your hair, or something like this, you might feel shaken up by this. And this is because the mind's clinging to the self-image, thinking that this is who you are. Or the mind might be clinging to a self-identity, holding on down to, I am American, or I am a police officer, or I am Brazilian. Maybe your culture, your ethnicity, your sexual orientation, your nationality, maybe your job or occupation, the mind can be clinging to any kind of self-identity in the mind. And as long as the mind does this, it's going to get shaken up in these situations. So if you ever notice that when you were in a relationship that you identified with, I am a boyfriend or I am a girlfriend, when that relationship was over, you might have felt this overwhelming urge to hurry up and get right back into another relationship. And this is just because the mind is identifying with, I am a boyfriend, I am a girlfriend. And now when I am single, the mind doesn't like that. And it might feel like the way to solve that problem is to reassume this identity by getting another boyfriend or getting another girlfriend. But that doesn't actually solve the problem. The problem is here, at core and deep in the mind, having this pollution of personal existence view and identifying with these roles. So you might be fulfilling the role of, I am a police officer, right? Or you're performing that role as a police officer. But the mind adopting the identity of I am a police officer, this is where the mind will struggle when it experiences impermanence. Or you might know that this body was born in America, but your mind doesn't have to identify with I am American. You can just understand that this body was born on a certain land that's referred to as America, but I don't have to identify that way within my own mind. That way you can reside peaceful and joyful. When somebody says something agreeable to you about that, you don't get pleasant feelings. Or if somebody says something disagreeable, you don't get painful feelings about that because you don't identify that way. And there's gradual training and gradual practice that is needed in order to be able to eliminate this from the mind. So this is just a little bit of an introduction to it. We're going to talk a bit more about it tomorrow when we talk about the universal truth of non-self. Then there's something called doubt. This is very common in the mind, that the mind might doubt the Buddha, his teachings, the community that you're part of. You might doubt your teacher or your own ability to get to enlightenment. Doubt is something that will hinder you from being able to actually attain enlightenment, because the mind is doubting whether the Buddha, the teachings, the community, your teacher, or your own ability to get to enlightenment. But you don't eliminate doubt through belief or faith or anything like that. The way that you eliminate doubt is through investigating the teachings, through examining them. And the more you penetrate into them and you independently verify them and see that they're true, that's when you'll be able to eliminate your doubt. And slowly but surely, the mind eliminates this doubt. Because in situations where you get angry and you get frustrated and you get agitated, and when you see your mind slowly making progress, and in that same situation, you're not angry, you're not frustrated, you're not even annoyed, even the slightest bit, you'll know that it's these teachings that are leading you to that mental state. And you won't have gotten to enlightenment yet at this point, but you will have eliminated your doubt. You will know with 100% certainty that your mind is moving towards enlightenment, because you will see that the condition of the mind has been improving and the condition of your life is improving. So this gets eliminated through investigation and examination of the teachings. Then there's something called wrong behavior and observances. There's two sides to this. What wrong behavior is this is where there's certain moral conduct that you might be involved in now that is causing harm. And then when that harm is going out into the world, it comes back to you. So say you're argumentative or hostile or bitter in certain situations. When you're putting that out, that's just going to come back to you. So by the time you eliminate this portion of this fetter, you'll be practicing wholesome moral conduct from the Eightfold Path, which I'm going to teach tomorrow, which is right speech, right action, and right livelihood. You will have cleaned up your moral conduct to a certain point where you're not doing those types of things. And this is going to drastically help you, because as long as you're being harsh and hostile and bitter through your speech, your actions, or you're causing harm in your livelihood, this harm is just going to come back to you. So by you cleaning up your moral conduct, you will be able to see more and more improved results coming back to you. So that's what wrong behavior is. And the Buddha is teaching you the natural law of karma, of cause and effect. These aren't rules or commandments. He's not trying to force you to do anything particular. Instead, he's just showing you that, hey, when you lie, when you speak harshly, when you're aggressive and you're hostile and you're bitter and these kinds of things, this is all just going to come back to you. When you slander and you gossip people, this is all just going to come back to you. And he's showing you this cause and effect. So that's what he's teaching you here, is this natural law of karma, of cause and effect. What wrong observances is, this is where someone might believe that rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship is leading to some improvement in their life. And if somebody believed this kind of thing, and say they're going to the temple and somebody's sprinkling some water on them, or tying strings on their wrist, or they're doing some kind of ritual or ceremony, and they think that this is going to improve their life, then the mind has this pollution of wrong observances, because the mind doesn't understand the ultimate goal is to cultivate wisdom and train your mind. You need to transform your mind. So if somebody's going to perform rituals and rites and worship and things like this, this means that their mind doesn't understand that those things aren't leading to enlightenment. Now, whether you go do those things or not, that's your choice. Everything in life is your choice. Maybe you go home, you're spending time with your family. Maybe it's the holidays. Everybody would like to go to the synagogue or the temple or the church, and you decide to go along as a family event, and you're there and you see people going to do all the different things that they do with the rites and rituals and ceremonies and worship, but you maybe are choosing not to do those things, or maybe you even choose to do those things. But it's not about whether you do those things or not. It's about what your mind understands. If you have the wisdom to know, when I take this wafer on my tongue, it's not actually going to produce wisdom, and therefore I'm not going to be able to get to enlightenment by putting this wafer on my tongue. You might actually do it just to participate with the group perhaps, but you understand intellectually that this isn't actually going to lead to any kind of beneficial result. Or you might be there and sing, and you might worship or something like this with your family, but you know that this isn't actually cultivating wisdom within your own mind. So that's what the Buddha is talking about here. There's sensual desire and ill will, which you guys are going to learn about quite a bit throughout your journey to enlightenment. So I'm not going to talk about that in detail now unless you guys ask questions about it. But let's look at the higher fetters. The higher fetters is, I'll jump here to conceit. There's many of them here, of course, that you'll need to learn about, but let's just introduce you to a few of them. Conceit is something that I talked about yesterday, and I think most of you guys were actually in class yesterday, so you guys already know about this. But if there's anyone tuning in on Facebook or YouTube, I can't see who's there and actually attending class. But what conceit is arrogance and pride and measuring and comparing, thinking that you're superior or inferior to others. And this boastfulness and this arrogance is going to stand in your way of being able to have harmonious relationships with others. And you need to be able to eliminate this in order to experience enlightenment. Because as long as the mind is arrogant and boastful and prideful, that means that there's ego in the mind. And an enlightened being will have eliminated their ego. They won't be boastful and prideful as they go about their day. Because whenever you're boastful and prideful and arrogant, people are just going to push you to the side. And your mind isn't actually enlightened at that point. So that's what conceit is. And it takes a long time to eliminate that. That's why I teach that early in our programs. And then the fetter of all fetters is this last one. It's called ignorance. That's what people usually translate it as. But I think of it as the unknowing of true reality, or a lack of wisdom. Because ignorance is like a derogatory word, and a Buddha wouldn't talk to people in degrading and derogatory ways. So this translations of ignorance isn't exactly 100% accurate, because a Buddha wouldn't talk that way about people. So you might think about this as the unknowing of true reality, or misunderstanding, or confusion, or lack of wisdom. Because what the unenlightened mind is experiencing is a lack of wisdom. We just don't understand in the unenlightened state that our mind is causing our own discontent feelings. When we're angry, when we're frustrated, when we're agitated, we firmly believe that somebody else is causing that. And it's because of our lack of wisdom. We just don't understand what we don't understand. And that's what's keeping the mind in the unenlightened state. And that's why from the very beginning, you're taught to cultivate wisdom. That's what you're ultimately working to do on this path. That's why you can't believe any of the teachings. You can't believe your way to enlightenment. Because with belief, you don't know what's true and you don't know what's false. You're just believing it. Because either You decided to believe it, you've convinced yourself to believe it, or somebody else convinced you to believe it. But by the time you eradicate this particular pollution, your mind is fully cultivated wisdom of the entire path to enlightenment. And it's not just intellectual wisdom, it's that you're actually practicing the teachings. Because someone might intellectually know the teachings to a certain degree, but if they're not practicing the teachings, then there's still ignorance in the mind. So for example, we all know and have learned over time that it's unwise to take drugs and intoxicants, for example. And we might intellectually have known that from the age of 12 or 14 or 16, but we still did it, right? And we might have still done it. That's because of our ignorance. We didn't realize the harm that we were causing to our body, to our mind, and to other people around us. So we still did it because we had this lack of wisdom and this lack of understanding. So by the time you eradicate ignorance, you're not just intellectually understanding the teachings, you're actually practicing them as well. So these are just kind of a little bit of an introduction to the 10 fetters. So you kind of know what's underlying all of this that the Buddha is teaching you, is to eradicate these pollutions. So no matter what teaching you see from the Buddha, it's always helping you to eliminate these pollutions in one way or another. So do you guys have any questions on anything I've shared up to this point before we go further? Well, it looks like Helena has a question. Helena. Okay, and Jacob has a question as well. So let me see what Helena has to say. She says, what are some qualities of enlightenment that manage to occasionally shine through the pollutions of an unenlightened mind? Something that we would be able to catch glimpses of in our lives right now. So think about how, like, sometimes when you go places, you might be kind or friendly or polite and respectful to people. And this is like the qualities of enlightenment shining through. Or you might be joyful when you're walking down the street and you might just have a smile on your face for no reason at all, right? This is like what an enlightened being is going to be experiencing. An unenlightened being can experience some of these things where you can be joyful, you can be peaceful, you can walk into immigration and you can see people and you're like just smiling at people and just, oh, hi, how are you? Nice to meet you, right? Or you can go to the store or a grocery store or something like this. And as you're experiencing these kinds of things, you can see some of the qualities of enlightenment shining through. But because the mind is polluted, it's only a matter of time before you get angry or irritated or annoyed. Something's going to happen. But there's certain glimpses that you get of enlightenment. It's almost like the light bulb is flickering. As you turn on the switch of an old-time light bulb, it flickers, flickers, flicker, 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 and boom. So you might have certain relationships where you can kind of feel somewhat enlightened. Like maybe when you're interacting with me, like you're always cheerful, you're always friendly, you're always polite, you're always respectful. But you're not like that with everybody, perhaps, right? Maybe in other relationships you have challenges, and that's just because the mind still has pollution. So you can get these glimpses of being polite and kind and friendly and respectful. You can sometimes be sitting somewhere and looking maybe at a landscape or something and be like, wow, this is so peaceful. I could just stay here all day. I don't need anything. I don't want anything. I'm just completely content just sitting here looking at this landscape. This is like the qualities of enlightenment kind of peering through, where you're getting little glimpses of that. So you might see these kinds of things throughout your day, throughout your week, throughout your month. And what you would like to do is elongate those periods of time longer and longer so that it becomes all encompassing. You'll actually get to the point when you're in like the second, third stage of enlightenment where you can go like a month or 2 or 3 where your mind is completely peaceful and completely joyful. You might even think you're enlightened at that point. But then after 2 or 3 months, you'll experience a little bit of discontentedness about something or another. But you'll know at that point exactly what it is and how to eliminate it. So you can actually experience sometimes these really elongated times. When you first get onto the path, you might experience a minute or 2 or an hour or 2 where you feel quite peaceful and quite joyful. But then it's only a matter of time before the mind has some kind of discontentedness. And then as you train for longer and longer and you accumulate more and more benefits, you'll see that amount of time elongate more and more. So those are some of the things that you can experience. Okay, Jacob, if you'd like to ask your question, sir, go ahead.
Yes, sure. I'm just trying, to do what you said before about exploring and learning. So basically, when we spoke before about getting to the alignment, and that eventually that will break the cycle of rebirth, I try to imagine that because I'm kind of visual person, and I am very good at visualizing things, and I thought that, you know, from my perspective, that's only my perspective, obviously, that every bad thing that happened to me turned out good, and somewhere in my mind, I wish to went through the alignment, but at the same time, I actually love life, even the downs of the life, because they turn to teach me, or they turn to give me something good. There's always something good coming out from my own perspective and experience. So I was thinking, is that would be number 6, some kind of unconscious desire for form, would you say? Or because from my perspective, and I just love life. I could be reborn as, you know, as a dog. I don't mind as long as I experience the life.
Okay, yeah. If you have a desire to exist in the world, that's the 6th fetter, the desire for form, that the mind wants to be reborn, and you're saying as a dog or as a human. So if there's a desire for existence, that is desire for form. And you would like to get to the point where you don't have that craving, desire, attachment anymore, that you can eliminate that from the mind. But what you're talking about seeing the brighter side of life, this is what an enlightened being is going to be doing. This is what you do on your way to enlightenment. Because while we recognize that there's certain misery and despair about life, you don't dwell there, right? You don't dwell in that. Instead, what you do is you recognize that, yes, there's certain aspects of life that can be quite miserable, but the goal of getting to enlightenment is to ascend beyond that and see the brighter side of life and do what you're describing, which is use those unfortunate situations, those unwholesome results that are coming back to you, use it as a way to cultivate wisdom so that you can make wiser decisions and produce improved results in your life. And that's ultimately what you're doing on the path to enlightenment. But the whole cycle of rebirth is just to acknowledge that once you learn it and you understand it, is to acknowledge that, yeah, as long as there's birth, there's going to be sickness, aging, and death. And there's also going to be grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. And as long as you're experiencing birth and you're wanting to experience birth, then you're going to continue to experience sickness, aging, and death, as well as grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. So by getting to enlightenment and escaping this entire cycle, you will no longer experience birth, you will no longer experience sickness, aging, and death, and you will no longer experience grief, pain, displeasure, and despair.
Yeah, but I'm actually fine with experiencing this because from my perspective, once again, life always has these two sides. So if there will be sadness, there will be happiness, and there always will be the other side. Mm-hmm. But that's just my perspective. Maybe that's why I don't really fully understand this, because for me, I'm just fine with experience, and it comes with the whole package, with the life. It's a part of the life for me. And to what you said before about, you know, seeing that there is good in a bad, my own philosophy at this time and moment is that I just let things flow and maybe focus and try to give my resources to the good things, because those bad things gonna turn out good anyway, in my own perception, my own philosophy, let's say. Let's call that this way.
Yeah. Sorry, I thought you were done.
Yeah, I'm actually pretty much done, yeah.
Yeah, if you enjoy sadness and you enjoy the misery and grief and pain and displeasure, you'll just continue to experience those same things over and over. And that's your choice. You're more than welcome to do that. But in yesterday's class, and you were describing a lot of things that you were challenged with and having difficulties with in your life in the past. You talked about a lot of different things. And this path is to evolve beyond that, to move to this higher consciousness and get to the point where you're never experiencing sadness, grief, and pain and displeasure ever again. That you can get to permanent happiness and having eliminated all the sadness and all those kinds of things. Right now, you're seeing it as, if I don't experience the sadness, then I won't appreciate the happiness, or I won't be able to get to the happiness. But the happiness that you're experiencing in the unenlightened state is ultimately displeasing and unsatisfactory because it's temporary. It arises, it changes, and it fades away. And your mind ultimately ends up in the sadness or the anger or the frustration or these other discontent feelings. And then because of your lack of wisdom, you experience all those things that you were talking about yesterday. But instead, you can evolve beyond that to this higher consciousness into a being that no longer experiences anger and sadness and frustration. And that's what the path to enlightenment is. If that's not what you're interested in, if you're not interested in getting to permanent peace and permanent joy, permanent happiness, then the path to enlightenment isn't for you. But if you're interested in getting rid of all that sadness and despair, you talked about depression and people taking advantage of you and the relationships that you had difficulties with. If you're looking to get rid of all of that, that's what the path to enlightenment is for.
Just that I would like to say something that I never said that I'm happy with the sadness or I like it, like you describe it. I just never said that. I said that I accept it. I let it flow.
Right, and that's why I said
to say other thing about. I got lost, but there was one more thing I want to touch about what you said. I wish to get to minimize or get rid of it, but it's not like that I like sadness. I just accept it.
Yeah, I didn't say that you like sadness, Jacob. I said if you like sadness, if you would like to continue to do that, then you're more than welcome to do that. I didn't say that you did like sadness. So this path is for someone who's interested in evolving beyond that, because right now the discontent feelings that you experience, it's ultimately going to result in you feeling quite miserable in some situations. So if you're interested in staying in that, then you're more than welcome to do that. But I'm not saying that you do enjoy it. That's just, what you're hearing. But if you would like to evolve beyond that, that's what the path to enlightenment is for. You don't need to accept these discontent feelings. But if that's what you've come to, and you are going to accept these discontent feelings, then the path to enlightenment isn't for you, because somebody who's on the path to enlightenment is not interested in these discontent feelings. They're choosing to evolve beyond that.
Okay, I understand. I'm interested to explore the path.
Okay. Well, you're in the right place then.
Because I'm kind of open-minded, and I believe that it's all going to be good for me.
Yeah, this is something you're going to hear tomorrow, that in order to get to this enlightened mental state, you're going to have to let go of a lot of the beliefs and opinions and views that you have right now, because those beliefs, you don't know whether they're true or false. You're just believing it because either you convinced yourself to believe it or somebody else convinced you to believe it. And there's certain opinions and views, certain perspectives that you have in your own mind right now that are keeping you trapped in this unenlightened state where you keep experiencing these difficulties and struggles over and over. So you're going to need to have an open mind and realize that you're going to need to let go of certain opinions and views and perspectives that you have. But you don't let go of your beliefs and opinions by bringing in new beliefs and opinions. The teachings of the Buddha Buddha aren't beliefs. They aren't opinions. They aren't views. Instead, what you're doing is you're learning, examining, and investigating his teachings. You're reflecting on them to independently verify them. And then you're practicing to be able to get to wisdom so that you can see the truth for yourself. But if you were just holding on to your current perspective and your current views or opinions, you wouldn't be able to bring in this new wisdom that's going to now inform your mind and help you to be able to navigate your way to this enlightened mental state.
That's why I do ask all of these questions, because I would like to explore and find out. That's where all of the questions coming from.
Wonderful.
Because for me to explore something, I need to ask a question to understand that better and to show my own perspective as well.
Wonderful. You're welcome to ask any and all questions that you like, but just understand that when you're sharing your perspective, that's an unenlightened perspective, and that's what's keeping you in that unenlightened mind. So what I'm going to share with you is just the opposite of what you're sharing, because what you're sharing is why the mind is experiencing this disgruntledness and this difficulties and these struggles in life. So whatever you share, I'm going to most likely be sharing something exactly the opposite of that. And that's what you're going to need to be able to learn and understand to be able to move your mind to the enlightened mental state.
Yes, of course. I'm happy to do so.
Okay, excellent. All right, so I'm going to move on, or let me just check Facebook and YouTube and see if we have any questions there. All right. I don't see any questions on Facebook or YouTube. Okay. So let's move on to the next piece, which is understanding these 4 stages of enlightenment. Now that I've introduced you to the 10 fetters, which are these 10 pollutions in the mind, I'll explain to you what the 4 stages of enlightenment are. There's 4 stages that the mind moves through as it's getting closer and closer to enlightenment. During the lifetime of the Buddha, they were referred to as stream enterer, once returner, non-returner, and arahant. Now we just refer to them as the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th stage of enlightenment. But the Buddha referred to these in this way for a reason. And I'll explain to you guys what that is here in a moment. Then there's something called a Buddha, which isn't a stage of enlightenment, but it's a unique and rare individual that I'll explain to you what a Buddha is. But first, let's talk about these 4 stages of enlightenment. The first stage is called stream enterer. And stream enterer has eliminated those first 3 fetters that we talked about: personal existence view, doubt, and wrong behavior and observances. These are the pollutions that the mind has eliminated. And in this first stage of enlightenment, the mind is experiencing a significant reduction of discontentedness. Whatever you experienced in discontentedness prior to the path to enlightenment, by the time you get into this first stage of enlightenment, your discontentedness is just a mere fraction of what it once was, because you've significantly improved the condition of the mind through eliminating some of the pollutions of the mind. We refer to it as a stream enterer because just like a log, when it enters the stream, it's going to eventually get to the ocean. It's only a matter of time. The same thing is true that once you get to the first stage of enlightenment, you're going to get to enlightenment. It's only a matter of time. Either in this life or some future life, you're going to definitely get to enlightenment. And maybe you were a stream enterer in your past lives. You don't necessarily know at this point. You're going to have a maximum of 7 rebirths by the time you get to the first stage of enlightenment. It doesn't mean you're going to experience 7 rebirths, but a maximum of that. So perhaps you've experienced this first stage of enlightenment in the past, and this is where sometimes people are a bit more awake. Even before they even come to the path to enlightenment and they start learning with me as a teacher, sometimes people's pollution is fairly low. And this is because they've learned the teachings in previous lives, and now coming into this life, their mind isn't as polluted, and they more readily make their way back to the teachings in this particular life. And now maybe this is where they journey further on the path to enlightenment. Then there's the second stage of enlightenment that we refer to as a once returner. This person has already eliminated the first 3 fetters because they did that in the first stage of enlightenment, but now they've thinned out sensual desire and ill will. Sensual desire is where the mind is longing and yearning through the sense bases, like the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the mind itself. The mind is wanting pleasurable things. So, for example, when you're wanting that piece of chocolate cake and you just can't wait to get that piece of chocolate cake, and if you get that piece of chocolate cake, you'll be happy, but if you don't get it, you'll be sad or frustrated. This is because of sensual desire. Any kind of longing, yearning, or even like sexual contact. If you're longing, yearning to have sex, this is sensual desire. The mind is longing, yearning for it. And if you get it, you feel happy, but if you don't get it, you feel sad or frustrated or agitated or annoyed. So if you're noticing that you have less and less interest in sexual activity, this is because the sensual desire is being thinned out. And what you're going to notice as your sensual desire is thinning out, that your ill will be thinning out too, like your anger, your hostility, your aggression, your bitterness, and things like that. Because sensual desire is the mind craving and desiring and wanting things to be a certain way. And if you get it that way, you'll experience happiness or excitement, pleasant feelings. And if you don't get what you want, you get painful feelings like anger, sadness, frustration, irritation, those other painful feelings that we've been talking about. And part of what happens is the mind arises this anger, this ill will. And now you become unskillful through your intentions, your speech, and your actions, being bitter and harsh and hostile to other people. Because the mind, with its lack of wisdom, it thinks that this anger that you're experiencing is coming from somebody else, when in reality it's coming from your own mind. So the mind becomes unskillful. So while you're reducing the sensual desire and there's less cravings in the mind, there's also going to be less anger and ill will. And there are certain teachings that you use in order to eliminate sensual desire and eliminate ill will. And by the time you've gotten to the second stage of enlightenment, you've greatly thinned sensual desire and ill will. And some people have already been kind of doing this even before they come to the path. This is kind of starting to be reduced and eliminated. So this is called a once returner, because if you die in this stage of enlightenment, you will come back to the world one more time into the human realm, and you will get to enlightenment in that next life. So once again, you might have actually been a once returner in a previous life. Okay. Now there's what's called a non-returner. This person has eliminated all the 5 lower fetters because they've already eliminated the first 3 in the first stage of enlightenment. They thinned out number 4 and 5 in the second stage. But by the time they get to the third stage, they've completely eliminated number 4 and 5. And if you die in this stage of enlightenment, you will end up being reborn into the heavenly realm and get to enlightenment from there. But that's not ideal. You would actually like to get to enlightenment here in this life so that you can enjoy the rest of this life in the enlightened mental state. By the time you get to the third stage of enlightenment, you're still experiencing discontentedness, just like in the second stage and in the first stage. But in this third stage of enlightenment, you might be experiencing discontentedness like once every 3 months or once every 6 months. It happens very infrequently, and it's very insignificant when it is occurring, so that you might just feel maybe 30 seconds or a minute or two, you might feel a little bit icky or feel a little bit off or a little bit uncomfortable, and you'll be able to eliminate that pretty readily. The mind can get complacent in this third stage of enlightenment because you don't experience very much discontentedness. You can go these long periods, 2 months, 3 months, even longer, where you're not experiencing any discontentedness whatsoever. But you need to remain vigilant. You need to remain dedicated and diligent to developing your practice so that you can ultimately get to the fourth stage of enlightenment. And that's where the mind is actually enlightened. And we refer to that in the Pali language as arahant. But today we might just refer to this person as an enlightened being because their mind is fully purified. They no longer have any of these 10 pollutions. All the 10 fetters have been completely eliminated from the enlightened mind. And this is where you don't experience any discontentedness whatsoever. It will be 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. There's no discontentedness. There's no anger. There's no annoyment. There's no frustration, not even the slightest displeasure in the mind. You're always in a good mood. You wake up in the morning, you're in a good mood from the beginning, all day long, and then as you're going to sleep at night, you're still in a good mood. And this is an unconditioned mental state. That is a permanent mental state. And your mind would have been gradually getting to this and seeing more and more of these qualities as you're making your way to enlightenment. So any questions on the 4 stages of enlightenment at this point? Anything that you guys would like to ask? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So let's go on to the next part, which is understanding what a Buddha is. I described this yesterday in yesterday's class, and I think most of you guys were actually in yesterday's class. This is where you understand the main criteria of what makes a Buddha a Buddha. A Buddha gets to enlightenment by themselves without the help of any teachers or any guides. They then dedicate the rest of their life to sharing their independently discovered teachings with countless people. And countless people will get to enlightenment during the lifetime of that person. Then they will dedicate the rest of their life to sharing their independently discovered teachings with countless people. And that's why people will get to enlightenment, because this person has deep wisdom because they got to enlightenment by themselves. So a Buddha will be able to help countless people get to enlightenment. Then the third criteria is they preserve their teachings in such a way that countless more people get to enlightenment after their death. So these are the three main criteria of what makes a Buddha a Buddha. They get to enlightenment by themselves without the help of any teachers or any guides. They then dedicate the rest of their life to sharing those independently discovered teachings, and countless people get to enlightenment. Then they preserve their teachings in such a way that countless more people get to enlightenment after their death. And this individual that we refer to as the Buddha or Gotama Buddha meets all three of these criteria. There's a certain aspect of a person's mind who's going to become a Buddha that is very unique to that person that other average people don't have. And this is what allows them to get to enlightenment by themselves without the help of any teachers or any guides. They have a deep, profound memory. Even in the unenlightened state, a person who's going to become a Buddha will have a deep, 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 deep memory. And the way that you can think about this is that an average being, they have a certain capacity in their mind. It's kind of like a hard drive that maybe somebody has, 500 gigabytes or 1 terabyte of hard drive space. And then as you've gone through life and you've had different memories, you've had to delete old files in order to store new files. This is why, like in the last 3 or 4 years, the last 5 years, you can remember pretty much all the things that you've been involved in and what you've been doing. But when you think back to your childhood, you just have spotty memories because you had to delete old files in order to store these new files because you have a limited capacity. But an individual who's going to become a Buddha, which is very rare in the world, they don't have that limited capacity. They have an unlimited capacity that they can remember countless details about their current life and their past life too. So they accumulate all this wisdom over multiple lifetimes that it all comes together in their last life to be able to get to enlightenment on their own without the help of any teachers or any guides. And now their mind is fully enlightened, and we refer to them as a fully, perfectly enlightened one because they don't have any teachers or any guides. So their mind is fully, perfectly enlightened. Where someone who gets to enlightenment with the help of multiple different teachers, that individual will probably hold on to a few things that didn't necessarily lead to their enlightenment. They might actually got to enlightenment, but maybe 5, 10, 15, 20% of what they have learned didn't actually lead to their enlightenment, but they're still actually doing those kinds of things because out of respect for their teacher, they might just be kind of doing those particular things. But by the time somebody gets to enlightenment as a Buddha, they don't have any teachers. If they try a certain meditation and it works and it improves their mind, they know that that's part of the path to enlightenment. But if it doesn't work, they'll just kick it to the side. So by the time they get to enlightenment, the only things that they know in terms of the path to enlightenment is the actual path to enlightenment. So that's why we refer to them as fully, perfectly enlightened, because they have deep, profound wisdom about what it takes to get to enlightenment. An individual who is a Buddha can quickly determine the condition of another person's mind, and then they're able to help them with teachings to be able to get them past that. So an individual who's a Buddha is able to determine the condition of someone's mind really easily by just spending time with them. And the only reason why they do this is to be able to help that person with teachings. They wouldn't just read somebody's mind and then just give them some teachings and kind of force it on somebody. That would be someone's ego or arrogance that would give unsolicited advice. But a Buddha, one of the reasons why they're so effective at sharing teachings is, yes, because they have this deep, profound memory, but also because they can observe the quality of somebody's mind and then provide teachings that is actually going to help them in that situation. And then lastly, a Buddha is a deep practitioner of their own teachings. They're essentially a living, breathing, walking example of their teachings. Whatever they teach, they're also practicing those same things as well. And the individual who's a Buddha understands that they're teaching just as much through their spoken words as they are through their actions, right? So its student is learning through their actions of their teacher. So they're observing their teacher in day-to-day life and person should be modeling the teaching so that you can learn how to practice the teachings closely. So a Buddha is going to be a living, breathing, walking example of their teaching so that other people can learn from that. And that's one of the reasons why a Buddha is so effective at helping people to get to enlightenment. So these are some of the criteria of what makes a Buddha a Buddha. And as I've shared, a Buddha existing in the world is very rare. The last one that the world is currently aware of existed over 2,500 years ago. And the world isn't currently aware of anybody who's a Buddha since that time frame. So you'll be able to get to enlightenment, but you won't be a Buddha at that point. There are some places that will teach you that everybody's a Buddha. You might have heard this if you've read books or you've watched things on YouTube or Facebook or things like this. They might tell you everybody's a Buddha, but the Buddha didn't say that, right? That's what people are saying today. This is the mind not understanding what a Buddha is. And when you understand what a Buddha is, you'll be able to see like, yeah, that's not what you're going to be doing, but you'll be able to get to enlightenment for sure. And you just won't be a Buddha at that point, but you'll be plenty happy with getting to enlightenment. You won't need to be a Buddha at that point, right? Okay, so this is what a Buddha is. And then one of the things that I share when I'm teaching is I don't just share what something is. I will typically share what something isn't, because this is actually helping you to understand what something is. So to help you understand what enlightenment is, let me share with you what enlightenment isn't. Enlightenment isn't where the mind is experiencing discontent feelings. If you're experiencing conditioned feelings, which is conditioned pleasant feelings like happiness, excitement, elation, thrill, exhilaration, euphoria, the mind is not yet enlightened. And remember here, I'm talking about conditioned feelings, where the mind can only be happy if this condition is met. If it's sunny outside, then I will be happy. If it's my bank account is this balance, then I will be happy. If my mom does this, then I will be happy. If my boss does this, then I will be happy. This is what's called conditional happiness. By the time you get to enlightenment, you're not experiencing conditional happiness. You're experiencing unconditioned happiness, where the mind is just always happy. There doesn't need to be any condition met in order for it to be happy. So in the unenlightened state, you'll experience conditioned pleasant feelings, conditioned painful feelings like sadness, anger, frustration, and others, and you'll experience conditioned neither painful nor pleasant feelings. Based on some condition, you're going to feel a certain way. And this is what the unenlightened mind is experiencing. If it's sunny outside, you might be happy. But then when it's raining, you'll be sad or frustrated. If your bank account balance is here, you'll be happy. But then when your bank account balance goes here, you'll be sad or frustrated. This is where the mind's going up and down and up and down. If you're experiencing that, the mind is just unenlightened. It's untrained. So now the opportunity is for you to be able to train your mind and get to that enlightened mental state. And then if you have a craving or desire to tell other people you're enlightened, you know that you're not enlightened. This is one of the best ways to know someone's not enlightened. So if you're just hanging out like at a smoothie shop, or if you're at a retreat and someone comes up to you and is like, yeah, by the way, I'm enlightened, you know right away they're not enlightened, right? Because they're being boastful, they're being arrogant, they're being prideful. So that's the best way to know that you're not enlightened, is that your mind wants to tell other people that you're enlightened. So if you encounter that, you'll know that to be true, that if someone's just bragging that they're enlightened, it's like, okay, well, what do you want from me? You want me to admire you? You want me to bow down to you? What is your mind wanting here, right? The mind is still wanting something. That's why it's going around being boastful. But if you've gotten to enlightenment, your mind is so peaceful and so joyful. Go be peaceful. Go be joyful. Why do you got to come around here and tell me that you're enlightened? What do you want from me, right? What are you trying to get? You want some admiration, or what are you asking for, right? So by the time you get to enlightenment, your mind's so peaceful and so joyful, you'll just go be peaceful and joyful. You don't need to go tell other people that you're actually enlightened. And then if you notice that there's complacency in the mind, where there's a lack of motivation or initiative, enthusiasm, or a willingness to do something, you know that your mind's not enlightened. You might feel dull. You might feel lethargic. This is what the unenlightened mind does, is it swings from side to side. You either chase and 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 want something so badly, or your mind will swing to the other side where you feel exhausted and tired and dull and complacent. And that's what the unenlightened mind is doing. But what you're doing on this path is you're coming to the middle where you have sustainable energy all day long. An enlightened being doesn't get tired or exhausted. They get sleepy. They need to take sleep. They need to have a nap or whatever. They get sleepy, but they don't feel exhausted or tired. And that's because they have sustainable energy all day long. But when you go around with these pollutions in your mind that we've been talking about, the mind can feel bogged down and tired and exhausted. So by the time you get to enlightenment, you won't have any complacency in the mind. You'll have ambition, enthusiasm, a willingness to do something, but you'll still rest and you'll still relax as well. So this is what enlightenment is not. Okay? So any questions on any of that? Let me check online here, see if you guys have any questions. Okay, I think Helena has a question. Let me see. Okay. I remember, up here. When you think of students who swiftly progressed or on the path, what are some mindset qualities or patterns that they've had in common? I remember from a recent Pali Canon class that diligence, dedication, and determination plus avoiding the 5 hindrances are required, but maybe there's something more. Thank you for your kind answers. Yes, dedication, diligence, determination, those are all qualities that an individual needs in order to get to enlightenment. Someone who lacks ego, that doesn't have very much ego, tends to make a lot of progress on the path very swiftly. But when there's ego and arrogance and pride in the mind, when the mind's holding on to things that it has learned in the past, it really struggles on the path. Oftentimes when people first come to the path to enlightenment, they've been learning or studying or doing other things, other places, and they have a lot of difficulties to let those things go, and their mind is almost stuck, that they are not interested or their mind isn't willing to be able to understand and have an open mind. So if there's ego in there, where the mind feels arrogant or boastful, and let me tell you everything that I know and everything that I am doing, rather than just listening and learning and understanding and asking questions, the mind can be really hindered in that situation. So these are some of the situations where someone experiences a lack of progress. But when there's the opposite of that, when there's the lack of ego and arrogance, when there's a willingness to learn, an openness to understand, when there's politeness, kindness, friendliness, and respect, when there's dedication and diligence, yes, all of these things are going to contribute positively to your growth and development on the path to enlightenment. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere else. So I'm going to share this last thing with you guys, and then we'll take a lunch break. This last thing is called the 7 factors of enlightenment. And what this is a tool to fine-tune the mind. Sometimes when people see the term here of 7 factors of enlightenment, they think this is to determine whether you're enlightened or you're not enlightened. But this isn't actually true. What the 7 factors of enlightenment are, is this is like a tool to fine-tune the mind. If you think about a sculpture, like if you were an artist and you had a raw piece of wood and you were trying to turn this into an intricate sculpture, you would probably get out your hatchet or your axe and start chopping off big chunks of wood at the very beginning. But then eventually, as you get this piece of wood whittled down to a certain degree, you're probably going to come in with this fine tool, maybe like a razor blade or something like that, in order to put the wrinkles in the eyes and around the skin or something like this around the mouth, because you're going to need this fine tool in order to fine tune the mind. Well, that's what the 7 factors of enlightenment are, is to fine tune the mind. That when you notice that the mind is in a certain state, either excited and elated, there's a way to kind of bring that into the middle to be more calm and tranquil. But when you notice the mind is dull and lethargic and sluggish, there's the tools that the Buddha gives you to bring the mind to the middle, where you can come out of that sluggishness and that dullness and that lethargic condition. And that's what the 7 factors of enlightenment are. Essentially, there's these 7 factors that I'm going to share with you guys. That the first factor is called mindfulness. You're going to learn this more deeply tomorrow when I talk about the 8-fold path. Generally, what mindfulness is awareness of mind. You'd like to have awareness of your mind. But more specifically, it's the 4 foundations of mindfulness. That's what the mindfulness is. And you'd like to be practicing mindfulness at all times. You need to be aware of what's going on in your mind. Then, whenever you notice that the mind is dull or lethargic or sluggish, you would like to practice the enlightenment factor of investigation energy, and joy. What investigation is where you have a keen interest in investigating the teachings of the Buddha. That when you're sluggish and complacent, you're not going to want to do that. You're not going to be interested in reading the book. You're not going to be interested in coming to classes. You're not going to be interested in doing meditation and things like this because the mind's dull and lethargic. And you're going to need to lift it up out of that by practicing the enlightenment factor of investigation, where there's a willingness and interest to investigate the teachings and examine them. When you're examining the teachings, you might notice this energy spring up in the mind. This is why, like, when you first start learning the teachings, your mind can be like, oh my goodness, wow, there can be all this energy that comes up in the mind because of this enlightenment factor of energy springs up as you start investigating the teachings. Because it's almost like the mind is like a dry sponge sometimes. And it's like, oh my goodness, I'm finally getting the teachings that I need here in order to figure out this life. And now this energy springs up in the mind. And then that's where the joy starts coming up in the mind, this unconditioned gladness of the mind. So these are three aspects of mind, or three qualities of mind that you would like to arise whenever you notice the sluggishness and dullness and lethargic condition, to bring the mind into the middle. That's investigation, energy, and joy. That brings the mind to the middle. It's to fine-tune the mind. But then you're going to notice sometimes your mind's excited. It's elated. It's kind of bouncing off the walls, perhaps. If you're noticing that, you practice the enlightenment factor of tranquility, of concentration, and equanimity. That's what brings the mind down into the middle and calms it down. You're going to need to apply effort to arise these qualities in the mind. The calmness, the composure, the evenness of temper, the tranquility of mind, the peacefulness. You're going to need to notice, bring in the focus and the concentration and the clarity of mind. This is what's going to bring it out of that excited state and down into the middle. Because this excited state, the mind is shaken up there. Sometimes people feel like they might live for that excitement. In fact, you might be chasing things in order to be able to get to that excitement. But in that situation, the mind is shaken up by whatever it's craving or desiring. So what you would like to do is bring in the tranquility, the concentration, and equanimity to fine-tune the mind and bring it to the middle. So you're going to need that mindfulness to be practiced all the time, so that then whenever you notice your mind sluggish, you bring in the investigation, energy, and joy. Whenever you notice the mind is excited or elated, that you bring in the tranquility, the concentration, equanimity. And now more and more the mind will reside in the middle. And that's where the mind can be peaceful and joyful. Okay, so this is the 7 factors of enlightenment. Any questions here from you guys? Okay, Helena's got another question. By the way, Helena, if you are able to raise your hand and talk, that would be wonderful. My eyes are not working so well these days. Was there anything that particularly surprised you on the path to your current mental state? Anything that surprised me? How polluted the mind was. That surprised me. I didn't realize that. How much suffering there is in the world, because the more that you understand your own mind's discontentedness and suffering, you start seeing it in the world around you. Those are things that really surprised me. But you work through those things, right? And as you continue to grow and develop, you move past that stuff and you just work more and more within your own mind. But there's plenty of challenges along the way. There's plenty of surprises, and you'll enjoy it. It's just like a journey, right? Like if you're on your way to Japan or to Germany or Mexico, I'm not going to tell you all the different things that you're going to experience, because go experience them yourself. Go have a good time, right? But since you're asking the questions, I'll give you a couple of things like this, but you're going to experience all kinds of surprises and challenges along the way. And that's part of what makes it enjoyable, because as you're struggling and having difficulties on the path, because there's certain struggles along the way, you're going to need help, you're going to need guidance, and you'll be able to work through those struggles. But also in those struggles, there's a lot of, golden nuggets, a lot of real fun where you come to the realization of, oh my goodness, I've been doing it this way all my life. This is a much better way to be able to do this. One of the things that really surprised me about this journey is actually how simple as it is, that we make it so difficult. because the teachings have been hidden for so long that we make it really, really difficult on ourselves. And I was surprised about how simple and straightforward it really is. While it's challenging, while there's definitely struggles along the way, it's a surprise really how simple it truly is, that we just make it super difficult. So that can help you perhaps. All right, interesting questions there, Helena. All right, I'm not seeing any questions here. I don't see any questions. All right, so what I'm going to do then is just in here. It's basically a little bit before 12. So why don't we take our lunch break and go all the way until 1:30? That'll give you like an hour and 40-minute lunch break. So enjoy your lunch. And when we come back at 1:30, I'm going to teach you guys Buddhist chanting and how to actually chant in the Buddhist tradition. And then we're going to do meditation together. So feel free to enjoy your lunch. And you can even come back here if you like. Some people like to go eat and come back here, even take a nap or something like that. You might even see me doing that from time to time. I might have a nap over here. So feel free to go do whatever you'd like to do. I'm going to leave the doors open, and then we're going to start at 1:30, which is about an hour and 40 minutes from now. Okay, so thank you guys for your questions. Thank you for your interest to learn, and perhaps we'll see you guys after lunch.